Blog Talk Radio.
This is Western Red on the World. We cover the lives of people in the political context and their relations to the nation state, the global political, from Nairobi in Kenya to Caracas in Venezuela, to Cairo in Egypt, to London in the United Kingdom, to Moscow in the Russian Federation, to Washington, the center of modern Western power, to the diplomatic capital of France, the political trends in many countries, from the Tory government in the UK to the right of center government in Paris on the Sarkozy, to Italy and the government that sits in Rome, to Reykjavik in Iceland, Tokyo, Beijing, the Democratic Republic of Korea, and other stops in between, as we try to make sense out of the world of politics, and specifically geopolitics, looking at the history of nations, pre-revolutionary and revolutionary stages, evolutionary politics, and the impact of social movements that are either progressive or regressive. These are the things that we want to take a closer look at as we develop this particular series. Now on with this installment.
Hey, Boston Radio here live. This is a new program. The call-in number is 323-792-2981. Again, 323-792-2981. And on we go.
Boston Red on the World for the 23rd day of August 2011. This is our maiden voyage here, so to speak, the first episode of this program. As we move forward, what we felt there was a need to have a program that specifically addressed international political developments as opposed to a sort of hodgepodge of getting the international developments in with the national political news from state to city within the United States. So what we attempt to do here is deal with the international side. However, we've been upstaged with a 5.8 magnitude earthquake that rattled Washington, D.C. The National Cathedral was damaged in this earthquake. Normally in the U.S. we have earthquakes in the West, primarily in California. I personally went through the one out in San Francisco. We were having a World Series there. The epicenter was 9 miles south of Mineral, Virginia, 87 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. This is according to the U.S. Geological Survey. It was recorded at 5.8, it's upgraded to a 5.6. And there was an aftershock at about 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and it was 2.8. White House shook pretty hard, according to an official there. The president, of course, in Martha's Vineyard. There's evidently no damage to the White House, but some paint and plaster fell. Now they'll blame that also on Obama. He should have been guarding the White House. No major infrastructure damage to airports, nuclear facilities, as far as they know at this point in time. The metro is running at a slow pace. That's the subway in D.C. That is a people mover primarily there. The Pentagon evidently was okay. The Secretary Pinella was in Monterey. He's from California, so that's no big deal. Would have not been a big deal for him. The Park Police helicopter checked out the monuments. None were evidently damaged as far as they could see. They're checking nuclear power plants from North Carolina to Jersey. The M.L. King Memorial has just come online. Evidently it was not damaged. I'll check some other things here. Normally when we have a day in journalism as we did today, the overrunning of the Belize compound, which is the center of government, very similar to the White House office. Executive offices were there. Colonel Gaddafi had his office and home there, his tent, etc., which is reported burned. Various things were ramshackled, looted by the gang that invaded the place. It's a maze of various buildings, gates, etc., sprawling there in the center of Tripoli. The damage, the rest of the damage, it was daylight when they went in. The NATO Air Forces blew the gate literally down. And this is the point we want to make, a couple of points here. There was a day of the so-called foreign correspondent in the early days of world journalism. It was a very important position to have. Now it is less a position because, first of all, with social media, people are twittering as fast as the correspondents can duck the bullets, and snipers there in Tripoli and various other cities across Libya. And also because of people and the many forms of entertainment they have. Hundreds of channels beaming on the cable, satellite networks, the internet. We're here, they are here, everyone is beaming at once. So the whole thing boils down to is the content. And that's what we're attempting to do here, is improve our content. Now, to the Libyan situation, what is basically happening there? We heard the head of the Transition Council, Jibril, speaking from Qatar. Naturally, that's where Al Jazeera is. He was there. He and his government are propped up by a cinematic campaign. We'll take that term from him, Gabriel, that is. Jibril, sorry, get his name right here. He was talking about Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's appearance in the streets on Monday morning, Sunday night of Libya, as that was just strictly theater. This whole campaign has been that. This whole episode you hear in a minute from the spokesman for the military of the rebel factions, and that's all they are, on what happened with Saif al-Islam Gaddafi. Was he in custody, not in custody? He's saying, well, he was in the hotel, we were outside, and he ducked out of the side door, more or less. But they had put this around the world. In fact, the World Tribunal at The Hague was looking to see Mr. Gaddafi be produced there in short order. There was no Mr. Gaddafi. There's been a lot of misinformation out here. And when you look at the speed in which these gangs were able to move, they were only able to move with NATO air cover, the attack helicopters, the NATO planes bombarding ahead of them, and the rumor is special forces. Because obviously these young men and some women were not capable of doing this on their own. Some had not shot an AK-47 before. So be very careful as what's happening. But back to the National Council. Their whole goal, according to Jibril, is a modern Islamic state. Their flag is the monarchy's flag. So this is one instance where we have a return to a different age, a return to a more reactionary period in the history of Libya, a colonial period. We have France there with Sarkozy, and the UK, the former colonial powers, and this operation called NATO, North American Atlantic Treaty Organization, that obviously has no place. There is no Atlantic, and there's obviously not a treaty breach in the Libyan area. Now, what they did in fact do, this is NATO, they put Turkey in there for good measure. But Turkey is a minimal member at best, provides some air bases, that's about it. The center of NATO rests in Germany, in the UK, and to a lesser extent in France. But this is just a grab in Libya by the colonial powers. They're already talking about the privatization of the oil industry and which nation oil companies will get contracts. Nothing will go to India, nothing to China because they didn't support this gang. It will go to the UK, which basically we are talking about in the UK, the British oil companies, BP, British Petroleum, several American petroleum outfits that are there, but they will get better contracts. Also, the Russian Federation will be pretty much left out of this situation along with China. So basically what is happening here, we see a grab from country to country. Now in Egypt it was different. Egypt had established military, and the military has always been the backbone of the Egyptian people. But in Libya it was different, a revolutionary country resting in a bunch of people's councils, which they were able to break down by presenting to the world that Colonel Gaddafi was killing his own people, when in fact it's been proven that the missiles that fell were made in USA. So they were not fired by Colonel Gaddafi. But when you can create, as they say, as Jibril says, this cinematic, theatrical type production, you can move on. The same thing they're trying to do in the Syrian capital, Damascus. We will, of course, be following that particular episode there to see as to where it will lead in the coming days. But in these types of activities, such as in which is in Libya, we have to wait a few days because, first of all, the media is presenting this as Colonel Gaddafi is the whole story. He's not the whole story. The Libyan people are the whole story. Colonel Gaddafi has had a revolution there for over 40 years. And no doubt people will go underground, and those things will develop over time. And it will take time for those movements to develop and to take their own forms there, and there are obviously other things too. The current so-called regime is not a regime. It is just a basic grab for power by some groups. They literally killed their commander in cold blood Yunus. So the president in the U.S. is on vacation or holiday, and nothing has been said of that. Just looking here in the Globe, headline is "Disorder Reigns in Libya," and so it goes. On the 23rd day of August, 2011, our first episode of this particular program. And as we fine-tune it today, it's not fine-tuned, you'll obviously get that. But we will be able to fine-tune it. But one hell of a day to kick off an international political program. This is Boston Red. Be careful.
The answers from the Colonel were hardly conclusive, hardly put any new light on that situation. And so, yes, today has been another historic 12 hours of battle at the very focal point of 42 years of this regime. That bunker, it has so much significance. So there was a resounding good feeling amongst opposition fighters, but that is coloured somewhat, darkened somewhat by suspicion about Saif, the son of Gaddafi, and where on earth was he when he was allegedly arrested and imprisoned. And then, of course, that word went out. That man that is regarded as a tyrant by so many Libyans. They were elated. They thought that was a definite figurehead. Aside from Gaddafi himself, that was a figurehead behind bars, possibly going to the International Criminal Court. And I spoke to a senior member of the military council in Misrata at the time, and he was confirming to me that this had happened, and that the other son, Mohammed, he was stopped. He was actually held away from security guards who wanted to take him out and possibly shoot him. There was a recording on the Al Jazeera recording of a phone interview with gunfire on it, and then the phone went dead. All of this was described to me, and it was categorically stated that he was arrested, he was behind bars. So what did happen? There are so many conspiracy theories kicking around, but it has to be said, Foley, this has extraordinary. I'm looking around the whole area now. There's red tracer in the sky, but there is no sign of any snipers in this area now. It was very tense 24 hours ago. When we arrived, we came under fire as we arrived. It is a lot quieter now, and it does appear, certainly I wouldn't go as far as to say that
73 after the 73 war, it was a last desperate step to do, and that's why we had to go to set the record straight. We have gained militarily and politically a lot, and the last chapter has been entering Bab al-Aziziyah. And I think a lot of the people a lot of the military commanders who have surrendered were because of this rumor, that unconfirmed information. I think that the Transitional National Council and the Libyan revolution is in its best state now since the 17th of February. In addition to all these political victories, which the last of which was Malta's recognition, there are some good news as well. to our brethren, the Libyans, who had suffered for these 6 months. Tomorrow we have a very important conference, which is attended and also which Qatar had called for. And I must at the moment recognize Qatar's efforts and its help throughout the 6 months, and endured all these doubts, all these name calling and threats as well. Threats directed at the Qatar national security and even some personal security as well. Also, there were other countries helped, which is the Emirates as well. Have in many initiatives, which was the last. Today was the political pressure that the Emirates had. The pressure that they applied on South African country, so that they can divert $1 billion to the Libyan, to the Transitional National Council, under different procedures, so that the council can deal with the economical hardships that the Libyans are suffering, and they have been suffering for the past 6 months. Tomorrow's meeting is going to be attended by United States, Qatar, Italy, Emirates, France, and Britain, and Turkey. The aim of this meeting is arrange to get $2.5 billion to the Transitional Council before the month of Ramadan, so they can start paying salaries to the Libyan, and so that they can buy the festive clothes to their children, and also that they can afford treating our wounded, and also for prosthetic limbs for our children, for our wounded. This is a very good. This is a victory, political victory for us this week. Also today, Germany has agreed our credit proposition, which we expect that the credit line would be transferred in 3 days. Therefore, the image that Saif had tried to do to show in this very vulgar direction, he tried to rob the Libyans of their victory. That the 18th of this month, Saif and his father were saying that there were only few hours remaining before this revolution is quashed, and that Benghazi, they're going to enter Benghazi, and that was in the 16th of March. Now, 6 months later, Saif is talking. He is sneaking into an area, in a small area which is in Bab al-Aziziyya, nothing more than that. And also this victory that we have achieved now, which entering Bab al-Aziziyya, which is a symbol, of the previous regime. This is a sign of our glorious victory. This revolution started by the Libyan youth, and I must confirm another time, again, to our Libyan youth, that have reinstated our dignity, although they were described by the worst terms by the regime. I must confirm to these youth that this is their revolution, your revolution, and you will have to finish this revolution not only by liberating the South, but also and also be present in any government body that should take part in making and forming the new Libya, modern Libya. This is I had to address you in order to clarify some of the ambiguity that persisted. I'm taking questions now.
And that was Mahmoud Jibril, the spokesman for the National Transitional Council, speaking live here in Doha, praising all those involved in the Libyan revolution, but warning nonetheless that the fight is aware of the significance and the symbolism that Bab al-Azizia represents. Just remind us how important it is that the rebels have been able to capture this very important site in Tripoli.
Well, this is the headquarters of the Libyan dictator, who has been in power, of course, for the last 4 decades. It has been the center of autocracy, the center of oppression. It's been the symbolism of a dictatorship that lasted that long without any choice of the people. The only attempt of the people to take it over was in 1984, and that failed. And so it does represent, if you will, the symbolism of oppression of a people by a regime that destroyed everything that is political in the country, everything that is institutional in the country, and everything that constitutes a social and a national fabric. So in a way, what the Libyans today did was destroy the chains that have held them down for 4 decades, that held down the majority of them who were born after 1970. So in a sense, the majority of the Libyans who know nothing but Gaddafi, you could say, have been reborn today after Al-Azizia, after Bab al-Azizia. Today, there is a future without Gaddafi. Today, they can imagine a future that they can make for themselves without a dictator.
But a great symbolic victory for the rebels, you say, Marwan, and yet Muammar Gaddafi is still nowhere to be found. So can you say that this revolution is really complete?
Not finding Gaddafi is the exception to the rule today. After what we've seen today, and after the speech by Mahmoud Jibril, mentioning that now the world community, the Arab world for sure, recognize the transitional council as a transitional government, means that in the future of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi is simply a sought-after criminal. The idea that Gaddafi, as a leader of Libya, that is over. Between the Libyan people,
there's no chance that he could strike back still?
No, absolutely not. But even if he does, he will do so as a criminal element, no longer as a political element. Because Gaddafi, all this time, even though he was a dictator for 40 years, but he was recognized by the international community as the leader of Libya, as a hegemon, but as a leader nonetheless, and hence carpets were rolled for him in Paris and in London and so on and so forth. But today, after 11 countries, after 11 extra countries, recognize the Transitional Council as the government, today the Libyan leader is simply a sought-after criminal.
And yet you mentioned the countries that have recognized the NTC, yet the neighboring countries, the African Union, still have not recognized this body as a legitimate body that's governing Libya. Do you find that surprising at all?
Yes, I do find it surprising, but of course, in the context of a history whereby Gaddafi had played a major role in the 1970s and 80s in liberating and in helping a lot of the anti-colonial movements in Africa. So in a sense, a lot of leaders in Africa felt that they owed the Libyan leader something, and indeed, Libya did play an important anti-colonial role in past eras. The problem with these third world leaders, the likes of Gaddafi is that while they did play some constructive role in the African context, but they did oppress their people nonetheless.
Right.
And hence, whatever legitimacy they might have gained outside their country in any populist or anti-colonial struggle, in the end of the day, they represented a people. And those people felt that they have been oppressed and repressed by a dictatorship for the last 50 years.
And the problem with these African countries also, Marwan, is that they now may fear that they could be next in line, having seen what's happened to Gaddafi, to Ben Ali in Tunisia, to Mubarak in Cairo. I'm sure that fear is there.
Indeed, alas, unfortunately, some 130 countries in the world today are defined as either dictatorial, semi-dictatorial, corrupt, and so on and so forth. So yes, democracies in the world today are still a minority. The majority still feel threatened. And the scene that we've seen today, the pictures and the statues of Muammar Gaddafi being stepped on the way they've been.
Reminiscent of the fall of Baghdad.
Certainly, except that this time around, this is not coming on a tank and on the foot soldiers of Americans and British and so on and so forth. This time it was the Libyans liberating their own country from, if you will, an internal military occupation by the Gaddafi regime.
But what about NATO's role? You say the Libyans liberating their own country, and this is what Western powers, the idea Western powers have been pushing in the last few days. Yet there are still a lot of questions about NATO's role in this conflict, particularly in these last few days in the fight for Tripoli itself. How much help did NATO provide to these rebel forces?
I think NATO's role have been, in terms of militarily speaking, quite helpful. Quite supportive to the Libyan revolution, but politically it complicated the Libyan revolution, and it will continue to complicate the Arab revolution, the Arab Spring in general. But what we heard earlier from NATO's spokespersons about a future supportive role for NATO in Libya, that is problematic.
Which means that they could be staying in the long run.
I mean, staying in whatever format. Maybe they want to train, maybe they want to hang around the neighborhood. In so many ways, you could say that Libya was more instrumental to NATO and to NATO's survival than NATO has been to the success in Libya, because now, at last, NATO has found a role for itself, one under the slogan of right to protect, intervention in Libya, and certainly it contrasts sharply with its role in Afghanistan and Iran, well, not exactly in Iraq, but later on, where it was a major failure. So it could say now, I mean, unfortunately, with a smug, perhaps gloating a bit, maybe in the future about a success. But I think in the end of the day, what we saw in Libya was a victory by the Libyans, one that was won first at the heart of each Libyan and later on translated in the streets in Libya by those revolutionaries, brave men and women who basically recovered their country back from a dictatorship.